Hi, welcome back to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. I'm Doug O'Brien, your host. Today on the program, we have Laura Sims. Laura Sims is an internationally acclaimed storyteller from New York, and she has been acclaimed by the New York Times as called a major force in the revival of storytelling in America. Laura's way of telling a story allows the mind of the listener to rest in a realm of imagination beyond thought and stimulates its faculties of kindness and relationship. She's done a lot of work all over the world. It's not a joke. It's not just a saying when we say she's an internationally acclaimed storyteller. She's been a professional storyteller for like 40 years or something, I think I heard her say. But at any rate, I am thrilled to have her on the show today, and we'll get to her in just a second. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Hello, Laura Sims.
Hello, Doug.
It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you. I'm really looking forward to. I have never been really interviewed by someone who is a hypnotist for compassion in the world, as you are, and that is exciting.
Cool. Well, I won't be doing much hypnotizing. But yeah, it'd probably be a fairly normal interview as far as that's concerned. But yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard so much about you over the years. I truly have. My wife, who works at Lincoln Center, I had an interview recently with David Gonzalez. I've known both of you as what she called a work of art at Lincoln Center. Your storytelling was a piece that they did, and they studied. My wife is what's known as a teaching artist, so they teach to your work of art. So I've known your name for years, and I'm just so thrilled to actually get to meet you finally and talk to you.
Thank you. Those were really sort of splendid years of telling the same story 170 times to audiences that were, well, I was supposed to be 36, and it was a long fairy tale. So I saw kindergartners. To my great surprise, I was in elementary schools, junior high schools, wow, which I grew to love, and high schools, where they would sit listening to a Russian fairy tale, and then, the Q&A was really interesting, and it was really great. It was kind of amazing, although wow, I felt I had to recover from that story. I didn't tell it for years after telling it so many times.
I think that's called paying your dues right there. Yeah. Reminds me, my background is in music, and so I remember the Beatles spent several years in Hamburg just playing every night for hours. And that was grueling and difficult. I'm sure it was painful, but I also got really, really good at playing music. So by the time they appeared on the scene, they were seasoned professionals at 22 years old. Wow. So, but you've really, New York Times calls you a major force in the revival of storytelling in America. How did this happen? What sparked your mission to revive storytelling in America, and how did that come to pass?
Well, I don't know if I did at some point set out to do that. And I don't know if I actually succeeded in what I set out to do. But I think in the 1970s and, end of 1960s to the early 1980s, there was this kind of plethora of culture and arts and interested in, formless theater and spoken art and, improvisational dance and all kinds of things that I was part of. And I accidentally once told a story in Central Park, actually in front of the Andersen statue, where now I sort of am the artistic director of bringing storytelling to that place. But I dropped out of graduate school after 3 days, and
after 3 days. I thought you were going to say 3 years. Okay.
Exactly. Well, my mother always thought I should have dropped out after 3 years.
What took you so long?
What took me so long? Well, what happened is that I went back to New York City, and I was actually very shy, but I didn't know what to do other than be in classes. So I went to the New School, and I was standing on a line to take a sort of philosophy of art course. And it was this very quiet, staid line. And across the room was a much more interesting line. And I think I thought, well, you dropped out of graduate school. You did the thing that your parents dreaded most. You might as well get on that interesting line. And it was a theater class with Ria Geisner, who was part of the Open Theater at that time.
Yeah, I know that name. Yeah.
Yes, and it was improvisational. She had you sing a song and then go out in the street and walk. It was sort of this remarkable activity of being present that led to so much in my life. Well, the first thing it led to, of course, was that you asked earlier, we were chatting, if I used voices in my storytelling. And she had us go out and sort of watch people and then come in and act like them.
Oh.
And I had this capacity since childhood, which I think was a heart of my family, of being able to hear somebody speak and not only sort of like climb underneath what they were saying, but I could get their way of speaking and mimic it. So she thought I would be great in this alternative theater company that was run by a great director named Julie Bavasso. And I got a role as a Native American woman. I was married to Hervé Vilches, the small person, the midget who was on, I forget the name of the television show, but anyway, and he was fabulous. And then I would roller skate on, and with long braids that I had at the time, but I would throw off my Native American costume, and I would have a kimono on, and I would go into a trance and speak Swedish. And of course, anybody who spoke Swedish knew that I was ridiculous, but anybody who didn't was quite impressed with me. And this was just this complete character-driven, wild show called Moon Dreamers, in which I began to, it was like climbing on the inside of theater. But I had to give up my job, which I had a night job as a roller skating waitress at the Tin Palace Jazz Club, and I couldn't keep it. So she thought I would be great teaching theater to children. Well, things that I can't memorize. I've never memorized anything in my life. And these were the kids of well-known off-Broadway and off-Broadway actors and actresses. And they used to come to my living room. And I didn't know what to do. So I would pull up all these improvisational activities that I had learned, which I really savored. It was like brought out something in me that I was unfamiliar with, but longed for. And then I would tell them like a Russian fairy tale. And then we would do inside the fairy tale, we would enact things, we would make songs, they would do dances, and they wanted to perform. And so we chose the Andersen statue, the front of it. And they did their show. All their parents came. It was a beautiful April day. The parks department in those days was so accessible. They gave us chairs. And then their parents wanted them to do the show again. And these kids, they're like, we know theater and we need something in between. And can you do a monologue? Well, I didn't have a monologue. So I thought I would actually tell one of the Russian fairy tales. Now, I was involved in experimental theater. All kinds of experiments did not have any form, did not have any storyline whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And here I told this Russian fairy tale of Ivanushka and Alanushka. What happened during it was formless. That the formlessness that we were seeking in all our experiments, suddenly there it was. It was so palpable between myself and the audience. Now, I don't know if I completely understood it at the time, but it was so intriguing that I did not go back to graduate school. But instead, I wanted to know what this was. And when the second performance of the kids was over, who, by the way, I still know many of them, and there was an old woman who had wandered by. It was a sort of very dignified looking woman with braids wrapped around her head and, thick shoes and a suit, carrying a bouquet of roses. And she was on her way to her Fifth Avenue apartment. And afterwards, she stayed through the second performance and came up to me and said, "My dear, you are a storyteller." And I sat on the knee of Hans Christian Andersen when I was 5
Oh my
in
God.
Odense, Denmark. And maybe you'd like to come tell stories here in the summer. She had literally raised 1 penny from every school child in the 5 boroughs and had this famous Danish sculptor create the statue.
She was responsible for that statue?
What?
She was responsible for that statue?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my God.
She was an amazing woman, the Baroness Dalerope. So this entire world opened up. So I went to the Museum of Natural History to find out what a storyteller was. And they were creating the People's Center. And so I asked the head of programming about storytelling, and he said, "Oh, well, you should come work for us." And so for 20 years, I worked in the People's Center, telling stories. I worked with, there would be cultural performances and crafts and literary figures who would come, and then I would research things and tell stories. So I spent all my time, not in the library of the museum, but the library behind the library, which is how I met, people like Joseph Campbell and Margaret Mead and Colin Turnbull. And I began to understand something. I was reading missionary journals. I understood that this was once a great healing and powerful art form, community building, ritual, spiritual connecting activity. And I wanted to know what it was. So that's where I really bit into it. And it was wonderful years. I mean, sort of extraordinary.
Wow, it's amazing stuff. Wow. You met Joseph Campbell and Margaret Mead.
Well, I took her classes at the museum, and then Joe was beginning to teach after he
Joe, you're just
left.
calling him Joe. You're just...
Well, everybody did. He was a nice guy, and he really loved young women. And his wonderful wife, whose theater company I sometimes did things with. But I attended his first workshops on myth.
Wow.
That he gave actually across the street from where I live now. And that's just, this doors opened up. I mean, getting a PhD in medieval literature was beside the point. I was getting educated in something so phenomenal.
Yeah. Wow.
So when you ask this question, did I want to make storytelling into something? I really wanted to see what would happen to revive this incredible form. A lot of the people I worked with in experimental theater thought I had really lost my mind, because now I was doing something that was associated with kind of jocular things in a bar or kids. But I understood it was something else. So I'm still on this quest. It's almost 50 years later. And I was very fortunate, and it's been remarkable.
Yeah. So that's really, really amazing story. Wow, thank you. So obviously you are a storyteller. Probably not the first person to tell you that. But yeah, so you were part of the revival. You were a major force in the revival of storytelling in America. And where do you think it is today? Because I'm seeing it like everywhere. There's the moth, there's the risk, there's storytelling in various forms. As I'm sure you discovered along the way with Joseph Campbell, Margaret Mead, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Storytelling has been around as long as there have been people, and it has served, as a community force that brought the community together. It taught the values of the community, taught the history of the community, the right way of being in different communities. For many, many years, it was a strictly oral art form, and the griots went out and told the stories that became the backbone of that community for generations. It wasn't until Aesop, who was, I believe, a griot, started writing some of these things down that we got, storytelling as it passed down through written form. But it's been around for a long, long, long time. Where do you think it is today? How's your mission going? Have you revived it yet? Is it still in need of some?
Well, it's a big umbrella now.
Yes, it is.
The word storytelling. It includes, it's used for all kinds of things that have been considered storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
But there is such a hunger, I think, for engagement and connecting to something deeply from oneself and with oneself. But it's also sort of co-opted by branding and corporations and
Sure.
people using the word. But where do I think it is? I think it is all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great news. The first workshop I took with Joe Campbell, there were very, very, sort of accomplished people in this workshop and me. And I was like, sort of like, if I could have made myself, so tiny and slipped under the chair, I would have. But he went around asking everybody, including P.L. Travers, who wrote Mary Poppins.
Oh, wow.
And, artists and editors and writers, it was like, there I was. And he said, and what do you do? And I said, I would like to be a storyteller. And he just completely stopped. He looked at me and said, well, then you're going to spend the rest of your life coming to know that all this world is a story, which was a very profound thing to say.
Indeed.
It brings me to where we are. I think the world is so, the extreme of materialism, individualism, and the effects of Western culture's structural obsession, the sort of tyranny of the way that we work and think. Again, it sort of like explodes open with all these experiments to sort of break out of the hold of that tyranny, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of personal storytelling, like The Moth. Some of it is great. Some of it is just, people not distinguishing between the story that they need to tell themselves and the story that engages a community. A lot of it's really high class performance art. The people really are up there and they're performing. And what holds the audience, of course, beside the sort of skill, the amazing skill of the performer, is a narrative. We're sort of always hungry for stories, something that has a beginning, middle, and end, something, I'm sure you write about this in your book. There's a kind of sense of suspense and connection that happens during storytelling that's quite unique. So I think there's a great desire for that. Yes, I think more lately, in a way, there is also this sense that storytelling is more than the content, and that that people are being, that what happens when we listen is transformative and healing. And
I've heard you speak of it being storytelling as a form of compassionate action.
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about right now? Is that it's this way of?
Yes. Or,
Okay.
we all think that the story is the narrative of the words. But for me, the story is what happens between us.
Between the
Because every
storyteller.
time a story is told, every single person that's listening is imagining, experiencing. At a, you probably know more about this than I do articulatively, but there is a kind of in between state where the sort of um, the mind only intellectual conceptualization sort of melts, and you become the story as you listen, and depending on the skill, the intention of the storyteller, but you become the story, and suddenly it's your image, it's the individual image of each person listening to the same, seemingly the same story. That is, I think, what's so sort of unusually delightful to everybody. We're there, everybody is deeply engrossed with what the story is happening to them. It seems to be about something in the content, but that's just the sort of carriage or the three-legged horse or the vehicle that gives this experience, which is what I saw in those early years, that with Joe Campbell, or with watching, early documentaries of Blackfoot women healing people by incanting a myth of creation. They knew the right songs and the way to do it. And you just saw someone who looked flat out brute, and then they're sitting up. Which I witnessed in Nepal, with Devis. And anyway, so this quality is coming back. There is more interest in that. I think, again, it's not always the way of storytelling, because you also have a lot of people very beautifully devoted to the content and meaning of a story, and memorizing a story and finding the meaning in the content. And my particular little piece of the pizza pie here is my great interest in how do you climb inside the story and listen to what's actually happening in the story, not what you're being told, and really connecting with symbolism and your own imagination associations, where myth becomes deeply personal and deeply personal stories become mythic.
That's beautiful.
You have a fantastic look on your face while you're listening to this thing.
Well, that's what you're talking about. It's the connection between the storyteller and the listener. And, there's so many questions. I was just this morning at breakfast reading an article in the local paper about an installation being done in Kingston, New York right now, about objects and the stories of the object. The story is an installation done by a storyteller and what's the word? Somebody who's really into symbols, and the symbols, like symbolic, like what you express through other than verbal words, symbolic stuff. And it was really interesting. And the installation is like broken objects. Like why would you throw that hair clip away? That doesn't work as a hair clip anymore.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And it is. And these objects have stories, and that's why they're important to you, because they are symbolic representations of the story. And it gave a little we were talking about how stories used, in business, et cetera. It gave a little statistic about value, that people put perceived value, like monetary value, on something. If it has a story, it has a much higher monetary value. Like this old sock, but that was Michael Jackson's sock, and he wore it the day, if there's a story behind this old little sock, suddenly it's not just this old sock, I'll get rid of that whole thing. It's like, oh, that's a really valuable part of it. I'll give you $5,000 for it, plus my left arm. I want that. It's the story, really, basically, that gives it that.
Well, it's the herd. It's the herd story. The story that's heard, that is so valuable. Because if you know the story of Michael Jackson, when you're hearing it, you're connected instantly.
Yeah.
that sense of celebrity, that ownership of something that belonged to someone else, like a kind of icon from an ancient ruin or
Mhm.
something that you bring back from the temple.
You know, if I may, you were talking before about how you were in that room with all those folks and thinking, I could just shrink down and crawl into the seat. I feel a little bit that way talking to you right now. And,
Oh,
and you and I are going to be sharing, if I can even put this, say this out loud, sharing a stage.
mm,
Hard to believe. I should be shrinking right now. But
no,
up at the Woodstock Storytelling Festival in
yeah,
October of this year, 2025, with people like David Gonzalez and others, and just people who are doing what you're talking about, who like embody the story and have that ability to just, let that. I mean, it's been said that your voice allows the listener's mind to rest beyond thought, tapping into imagination and kindness. I'm not sure my voice does that. I mean,
like your book, you're talking about voice is different from a book. Well, my voice,
I know. Yeah, it is.
did you ever hear? I took these singing lessons here
Uh-huh.
in this house once with Richard Armstrong, who was part of, I forget the name of this singing method, in which he could sing 5 octaves, and it really opened my voice. And he always said, well, your voice is as individual as a thumbprint, a fingerprint.
Yeah.
So finding your authentic voice, having your authentic voice is something that is almost irresistible.
Hmm. Cool.
And so there are several skills, unusual skills, if for, you're so involved in skills for a storyteller. And one of them, of course, is how do you allow people to uncover their innate sensitivity to what's occurring, when to say a word, how to say that word, how to be with the audience, how to be with the space. So that's that's a skill that is really interesting to sort of facilitate, because I can't teach it to somebody, they have to discover it. But the other is one's voice. And so at one point before COVID, when I used to teach here a lot, do these weekends here in this big loft, which is behind me. And I realized that some of these people were so fantastic, but like, what was it? How do you?
Big loft. I just wanted to see. Oh wow!
Yeah, not just
Funny.
part
That's
of it,
what
but
people think of when they think of New York City apartments. It's like, yeah, big space thing.
my landlord once came up here and he said, people would die for this, and I panicked.
They would kill for that, actually, which is the even scarier thought, actually.
But the other thing is that I would have them standing opposite each other, and I would have somebody just say a word and just let it be, there, that's the word. And then their partner would hold their hand up, and you have to hit them with the word, with the sound of the word, so that you could really get a sense of the difference between, just sort of by rote, or the voice that, sound. And you're as a musician, so that, how sound infiltrates us. So it's like, so those are some of the great skills. And what I'm writing about really now is about the really unique role of the narrator. But I think it'd be really exciting to be on stage with you. Why am I alone here now?
Sorry,
There you are.
put back on there again. Because I can do this kind of thing. And I also, by the way, I was saying before, I feel like I should shrink down. I can do that too. Look at this. I can shrink down. You can be big.
Oh, can I see can shrink me down?
I can do that too.
That's like characters in a fairy tale who, if you put they're so small that you could put your 2 fingers around her waist, but if you open it, you fill the entire universe.
Oh.
So that's something that the mind can do. And that is so everybody who's listening, who has slowly sort of become entrained to imagine and feel the story, suddenly they're like imaginally the tiniest drop, and then they are filling everything. The impossible is completely done.
Can you?
So that's what
I was just going to say, can you share a story from your performances that transformed an audience, either personally or collectively?
I don't know, but
You don't have to.
I'll give you 2 tiny stories.
Okay.
And this is one that I have fallen in love with. That people say that's not a story, but I
now
think
you really
it,
me.
so. There you are. Ding. So this is a really, of all the stories that were collected, this is a very, 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 very old story told by the San people, who we call Bushmen. And one afternoon, I was just going through this book that has been on my shelf for 30 years that is now made out of Scotch tape and spit and heart breathing. And there's a story I never read before. And I thought, this is a story for our time. And this is a story that's more about what happens to you when you listen. So there was a hunter. You following so far?
Yeah, I got it so far.
And he went out to gather food to feed the entire village. And he stayed out late. He had enough food to feed everyone. So he thought he would just go to sleep in the bush and return home in the morning. So the food was beside him, fell asleep. In the middle of the night, a dog passed by, smelled the food, ate everything.
Oh.
So when the hunter woke up, it was gone. He stood up and said, someone was as hungry as I am. And he went out to find more food. Isn't that amazing?
That's beautiful.
Okay. Now I tell you, because you wanted voices or sound, now I'll tell you a story that long, it's just like 30 seconds maybe.
Okay.
But I was working with Steve Gorn, who I worked with for years, and a Turkish musician. And we were rehearsing somewhere on like 8th Avenue and 14th Street. There was a rainstorm, and Manhattan, rain is like a major catastrophe. And I thought I would, because I had all this stuff with me, I decided to take a taxi from like 3rd Avenue, where I lived at the time, to 8th Avenue. And my taxi driver was this really stern-looking, dark-haired, bright-eyed man, and the name on the taxi, whatever that was either Turkish or Armenian. And I was going to work with a Turkish musician with a Turkish story, and I was very excited. So I said to him, trying to be politically correct, "Are you Turkish or Armenian?" He said, "I'm Turkish." And so I said, "Oh, you must know Nasruddin." Nasruddin is a completely, Middle Eastern, North African, Central Asian character, trickster, fool, and his stories are quite remarkable. And I said, "You know Nasruddin?" He said, "I do. My mother told me stories." So he stopped the taxi, turned around, and told me this story. Nasruddin was in his living room studying kamancha, which is a long-necked lute, and it's very melodious. Men play it all up and down with their bow. But he played one note in one place, sounded like this. He was driving his wife crazy. She said, "Why don't you play that instrument like the other men all up and down?" He said, "They're all looking for this one note." Once after one of these Lincoln Center Q&As, I don't know, just I had extra time. I said, "Oh, I'll tell you the story." In high school, I told this story, and there was absolute silence. It's like, huh? Absolute silence. So I looked at the teachers who were completely distracted and everything, and I said to the kids, "If you want to know what it means, ask your teachers." Anyway, okay, how was that?
That's
what
great.
happened to you? What happened?
Oh, golly. Well, of course, I was in the desert there at night, and I was sleeping next to all the food, and then the dog came, and I was not going like, oh, I guess somebody as hungry as I am. That was not my reaction. So when he did that, I was like, oh, wow, that's better. That's a better reaction than,
Right.
yeah, that's beautiful.
Think of that, because if people who are listening are becoming the story, then
Yeah.
in that moment, something that they might not do or even consider in their everyday life, they're doing imaginally.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, studies have proved that. I mean, I thank God for science that proves stuff that we kind of know already. But yeah, it really does. That the parts of the brain that would be lighting up if you're doing that are the same parts of the brain that light up when the person listens to the story about that happening. It is that. So yeah, very much so. And with the one note guy, I was thinking, boy, that is really annoying. But he's right. He's right. That those musicians are looking for that one note, you know. Actually, for the Woodstock Storytelling Festival, I'm probably gonna be playing some piano and telling a story about playing piano. And that there is a piece that is the melody is kind of one note over and over again for a long period of time. It changes because there's a couple other notes, but there's also the chords change behind it, which gives a different background for which that one note to be in relationship with.
That would hold everybody, because you're also like in a kind of state of suspense.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
But it's interesting. The subtitle of my book is well, I don't know if it's a subtitle, but it's one of the main themes of my book is that to tell a good story, you need a good story, and you also need to tell it well. Your ability with voices, you seem to be just a natural gift that you had, kind of imitating people. I remember when I was studying music in London for a year, I was at Guildhall School. Oh, you performed at the Barbican, didn't you? I went to school at the Barbican. I went to school when the Guildhall was just moving there. So there's somebody had did some graffiti on the sign that said Guildhall School of Music, and they wrote Guildhall School of Building and Construction, because it was jackhammers. But yeah, I was there for the first inaugural year. At any rate, the actors in England studied voice for the most part. They didn't do like method acting in New York City where they're like getting into the drama of the angst of the character and bringing that out, and that's going to inform how they say what they say. It was not that at all. They were getting the voice, right? And they were using the Alexander technique and other ways of letting that voice out to just get the right voice for their character. And then when they got the right voice for the character, then the embodiment would come, and the actions would come from the voice. How much do you find that's true for your way of doing your stuff?
Well, it's such a good practice, and what you're describing. But for me, there's no character of the storyteller. I am sort of a heightened version of myself. I'm just there with my audience, I have to really practice being there and knowing the difference between myself and the story in many different ways. But I'm it's a taste of a character. It's not a full-bodied character study that an actor might have.
Okay.
You know, I don't even know whether I'd be very good at that, because I've never studied or really done that. But it's something else. I'm always it's like what you were describing with the notes. I'm always returning, in a sense, to the ground of the narrator. And so sometimes, you know, a story goes, and then and the woodcutter knocked on the door and the door opened. So I'm kind of neutral in a way. And then standing there was a woman, you know, with long black hair, eyes blazing. And she said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, I'm searching for something I lost." And she said, "Come right in." And then it's back. So it's a different kind of entrance to the character. And for me, you know, everyone has their own, like you said, you know, I always say, you know, you need a good story, but it really depends on who's telling the story and how they're telling it.
Yeah, really, really, thank you. I mean, yes, I know that, but you seem to have a real gift for being the right person telling the right story in the right way.
I don't know. I mean, I've worked at it.
Yeah,
and, you
well,
know, certainly I have sometimes it's very a desolate feeling when it doesn't work, when I think I'm getting away from it, or my intention of wanting people to understand something, or I want people to like me, some like obstacle rises up. I feel after it's kind of like almost desolate. But when the whole when the relational quality is fluid, and you know, I have managed in a certain way to finally disappear. A good storyteller, nobody's interested in me, really. Once the story starts, they're interested in their experience. So but you know, that is what I work with. You know, different people work with different things, and sometimes I say, "Oh, that's not storytelling," but then I see them and they're really great, and it works. So there's some quality of our intention and our relationship to others. You know, you could be really, you're telling a story while sitting at the piano could be far more dynamic than somebody who's doing a whole lot of things, you know.
Yeah, sure.
Once in the Royal Festival Hall, there was a traveler woman, and I think her name was Sheila Stewart. And she just came out and she sat on a folding chair. This is major concert hall. She never really even looked at us. She was told the story that was so riveting that you couldn't hear anything in the room. It was, and certain Native American storytellers that I have heard, same thing. They're sitting looking down, and yet what's happening for all of us is so vivid, this plethora of landscapes and emotion and associations that's occurring, disappearing, rising, disappearing. Then a little comment is made to you off the side and you laugh and you're brought back, and then all of a sudden you're back in the story. It's like a mind exercise, like an imagination gymnasium.
Yeah. No, it's really true. It's interesting. My wife teaches clown at the New School. She teaches clown at the New School and also at the Barrow Group and other places in the world. But she often has had people it's been very easy for some people and very much of an effort for others to, when they put the nose on, because that's all they do. It's not the clown like Barnum and Bailey. It's theatrical clown, they call it. So the only costume they have is a nose. But they don't speak. There's no talking. So everything is through gesture. In fact, in France, they call it mime, but it's not, what we think of as mime. But it's remarkable when I've seen this class, I've participated in some classes, that sometimes when you're not speaking, and it's just like this little movement, that something very, very small can be huge. A little tiny gesture can,
exactly,
can be enormous when that's based on nothing else happening. Whereas other people are coming out and they're like trying so hard to be funny, and it just isn't working at all. At all.
But you said something, I don't know if you said it before we began or as we began, that people have a different attention span. Mm-hmm. People are very accustomed now to being entertained in a particular way. So they're very familiar, and so they'll really like something because of that. And sometimes, if I really can stand in my feet, as Indigenous people say, I might just launch into a 40-minute story, because I think how wonderful it's going to be when we're all right there together in this kind of completely three-dimensional, we are not going anywhere, but we have this sort of three-dimensional thing happening. But you have to start where your audience is, in a way. It's a certain kind of act of seduction.
Cool. Hey, listen, I know we're getting around about we finish, but I could talk to you all day. Do you have a few more minutes, or do you want to?
Yeah, no, I do. I have some time, and I also really like this conversation because you're so genuinely interested.
I am really very, very interested, honestly. So yeah, no, it's absolutely fascinating to me, and to be able to have the honor of speaking to somebody who's so gifted at it. I mean, just honestly, just going back to what we said at the beginning, where you worked with Lincoln Center and you told you were hired to do 36 visits to different schools back in those days, and you ended up doing like 140 or something. I've had a similar experience where I've taught, not taught, but I've done hypnosis workshops for weight loss and smoking cessation that were essentially the same workshop every time. And I traveled the country and did it in different cities. So I do, the weight loss one in 3 different cities and the smoking one in 3 different cities. So we do them both. I did a smoking cessation from 6 to 8 and the weight loss from 8 to 10. And we go to another city, do the same thing the next day. And I've traveled the country for years doing that. Wow. So I must have done that seminar like 1,000 times or something. And yet when the people are in the audience, they've never seen it before.
That's right.
Or heard it before. And it's all brand new to them. And they're like, so, and the hypnosis has to be like genuine and,
that's right,
tailored to the moment and that sort of thing. And it taught me so much about doing, stagecraft, if you will, for that sort of thing. Because it was hypnotherapy. We were helping people quit smoking. And it wasn't like a show. We were helping people make the change. So that connection was vitally important. But it seems like you might have gotten that same. I don't think anybody can take a class in what you learned. You said you've practiced hard. It's like, it's not just practice. You've been performing for years.
Yeah, I've developed classes that I think, well, the one that I'm doing lately, because it's online, it's not, face-to-face, is called the Great Story Immersion. And I really love it. It's like this collaborative exploration of a single story. And also I get, so the skills come up, and we can do some of it online, but a lot of it's about how you figure out what's happening in the story so you can bring it to life as opposed to just the words to life. And these skills that you're talking about, like I remember once I was so tired at Lincoln Center, and I was in a school where they had no microphone, and they're supposed to only have 200 or 300 kids, and there were 400 kids, and I just thought, oh my God. So I had to get up and stand there and then just feel them. And something happens in that opening up beyond my preoccupation with my exhausted neurotic self there. I was just suddenly, and this is probably what you tasted also, it's just suddenly you're there. And there's so much energy in that. I forgot what that was during COVID. First, when I was telling stories online, I almost felt ill and I couldn't figure out why. And then I realized because I'm used to things going through to the other person and there's kind of reciprocity occurring, but then it came right back to me. So I mediated. I found a way to do it. But then I was in this club downtown, and it was this kind of thing where they had generations and, like 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And I was the last person because I had just turned 70. But I hadn't been in a live situation. And so, we were backstage kind of chatting around. There were really lovely people in this group. And then they called my name out and I went out and I stood on the stage and told a story. It was a true life story about something that happened to me in a school, in which I tell a little other story. I try to sneak in a traditional story in these true life story things. But afterwards, I felt like someone had just put me in electric socket. I went outside and I felt like I was electrified. I felt like I must be I could be beaming or something. I just was like a wild horse that had to walk home and then walk around the block so I could actually even go to sleep. I forgot what it was like to be there in a live performance.
Nice. Yeah. So that is something, of course, one can only really do with live performance. And you can't really practice that in a mirror.
No.
Yeah.
No, there are other things you can practice, but do we really see ourselves in the mirror?
Oh, that's interesting.
And also then, how I'm a writer as well. And so how do I keep that? How do I translate that kind of life force into the written word is really other interesting.
Well, then, how do you?
Well, I think it's taken a long time.
How many books have you written, by the way?
Well, I have 2 that are here that I'm just finishing the editing of. And I have the one, Our Secret Territory, The Robe of Love, Becoming the World. Nothing is like I'm terrible at marketing. It's like the least. I should have gotten a degree in marketing before I dropped out those 3 days. But I've done about 5 books.
Okay. And are children's books?
I have done 3 children's books, and I've done collections and a lot of recordings of children's stories. But this book, the new one, is called The Story of Wild Rose, Summoning the Restoration of the World. And what I attempted to do in the writing is to manifest or explore through language, because that's what I have there, what really happens when you're listening to a story, the profundity of it. So it's one Romanian fairy tale, and then I go into it, and it's a combination of personal narrative memoir writing, commentary on what happens when I tell a story, commentary on the story, and botany of the wild rose, which seems to me to kind of mirror the whole living quality of storytelling. So that's that book.
Wow. Oh, God, so many questions. How do you pick your stories? I mean, goodness gracious, as you've just been saying, um, there's a difference between listening or telling a story from reading or writing a story. So how do you find the stories that you want to tell? Do you read them and then say, well, I could voice this, or how does it come to pass? Like, just as an example, I have lots of music books over there. I don't know if you can see them on the floor. I can't. I try to keep them out of camera sight. But I've been given music books as a gift and go like, thanks.
Mm.
I have heard this. I have never heard this music before, I can read music, but it's different still from having to translate it from a page. But then I've heard sometimes people play songs, and I go like, oh my God, I love that sound. I want to play that. And then I'm engaged by somebody else's performance, so I want to perform it too. Right. Do you hear other people tell stories and say, I want to tell that?
I try not to tell other people's stories because I feel it's so unique to them. And, right. In the great tradition, there's just a tremendous regard for the fact that someone has made the story from their essence. So I try not to tell other people's stories.
So what about this Romanian storytelling story?
Well, this story, I found, it happens in so many different ways, but I found a book that I had from my childhood, one of the Lang, fairy tale books. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so it was the kind of thing, I'll do a little oracular thing, open it up, see what happens. And here was this story called The Story of Wild Rose. I read it. I thought, God, this is a terrible story. I shut the book. Okay. And then there were images that kept returning to me over the weeks. An old man, an old woman who had no child, who were as old as the goddess Venus. A girl who wasn't born from an apple, who as an infant is stolen by an eagle and is in a nest for 14 years. So the images, they just, it was as if they called me. So I thought I'll spend a couple of weeks thinking about this story and see, if I can bring it alive, tell it. What is it about? What's in there? It's like very often it's a kind of hidden. What the story was before it was written down. It's kind of like chambers in a dream that you didn't realize there were all those rooms. So it actually was 10 years. Of exploring this story, which brought me to explore many things. And a lot of it was during COVID. So I was, for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't traveling all the time. It seems like you've done also. And I really liked being home. It was like rediscovering the heart of what I had fallen in love with in the beginning. But I asked once a Native American storyteller, Ron Evans, to help me understand a story. And I said, I don't know, I chose the story. He said, Laura, you never choose a story, they choose you. Like that piece of music that you heard.
Kind of, sort of, yeah. Yeah, I guess so. But it's also really interesting because, the idea of the images, the symbols, if you will, of the girl being stolen by the eagle and being raised for 14 years in the nest, just images like that. Like, why does that stick? Why does it stick with you so much? What is it about that? Is there a kind of universal thing? I used to go to this Jungian therapist. I love Jung's work. Not far from you, actually, 8th Street and 10th Avenue or something like that. No, that's not right. Where was he? Anyway.
Was it 10th Street and 6th Avenue?
It was actually David Bennett.
Oh, I've heard of him, but I don't know. That's not.
It was many years ago. At any rate, I would tell him a dream, right? And I'd have this dream and I'd read it to him. He says, "Oh, wow, that's very interesting." And he'd walk over to his bookcase and he'd be looking around and pull down this book and he'd open this page and say, "Here, read this," and be like, "Holy crap!" that's my dream. How did they know that 50 years ago? It's just. Jung was a great believer in the collective unconscious, that we all have these symbols of that, are human, and if we can sort of quiet our brain or go into trance or, have dreams or whatever, we can get access to this collective unconscious, and these symbols resonate with us. And stories, I think, are like that. They have this symbolic storytelling, which is perhaps why the old stories, keep coming back and keep finding other people. They choose other people. You tell me.
But it depends. It depends who tells it and how the storyteller has allowed it to live in them beyond the sort of logical, this means that and that means that. How are all the things interrelated inside the story is another question that's so luscious to deal with. But I come back to this exhibit, which I'd love to see this about the objects and the symbols, because very often, I bring an object or let people imagine an object, and that becomes the whole way that the story begins. There's a sort of skillful way in which you associate and find the story that the object has brought up from your unconscious. Memories that you thought you understood that are different. Or
give me 1 second, I'll go get the newspaper.
Yeah, but I actually do have to go.
Okay,
because I want to tell you something. Here we are talking about broken objects, and over a dinner, somebody told me about a Hindu goddess named She Who Is Never Not Broken. So I began to research that, and I do from time to time these events called Sudden Story. And Thursday evening, I'm doing one which is called Never Not Broken. So I have 3 storytellers, myself and 2 others, and then I interviewed this amazing woman in India who's named after that goddess.
Oh, wow.
And who knows her songs. So she's going to talk about the goddess at the end and sing this praise song.
Nice.
But we're all just exploring those parts, stories, personal and transpersonal, that are about seeing this world as, the goodness of what is broken, because it's not out of repair that needs to be fixed. It's broken open. It's alive. So it's so that's what I'm doing. That's why I'm so intrigued by the broken objects. And I'll send you the little flyer.
Good, and I'll send you the little article.
I'd like to have you in it, actually.
Next
time. You should be on Sudden Story sometime.
I'll be there.
Yes.
I'll do it.
Yes, good.
But meanwhile, we will both be together at the Woodstock Storytelling Festival on
October
24th, 25th, 26th in Woodstock, New York. So we'll put in the program notes how to find, it's laurasims.com.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
laurasims.com. So that's pretty easy to remember. And we'll put all the links and things of how to get hold of you and find out what you're doing, classes that you teach, books that you've written, etc. All in the program.
Thank you. And I wanted to see your book, but when we're together, we'll have time.
Yes, that'll be fun.
Which is so lovely, and I'll see your wife again. This is just so auspicious and lovely, and thank you for doing this. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Trust me on that. So thank you for being here. And folks, if you like this program, please like us and subscribe. It helps us more than you can imagine. Really appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.